welcome to the Baby Playbook podcast. Thank you so much for joining me again for another episode, decoding, I guess, that first 6 months of having a baby, everything that you need to be prepared for, everything that you might be going through at the moment, and the crazy questions that you might be Googling. We've all done it, so don't feel like you're the only one that has. But we're trying to answer those here at the Baby Playbook. And today is all about a challenge that kind of comes towards the latter part of the first 6 months of having a baby, which is when you have to start thinking about solids, introducing food to your baby outside of milk, because milk is such a huge focus for so long. And it kind of feels like once you get a grip on that, you now need to start solids. So it's such a challenge to navigate. I know with Noah, my experience was I did all this research into how to start, what meal, what type of food, the whole classic debate of baby-led weaning versus puree. There's so much to read. There's so much information out there, which is great, but it is also really overwhelming at times. So this is what this podcast is about. I just want to ask the simple questions and get the simple answers on these topics so that you guys can make really informed decisions. And today I am joined by the beautiful Olivia Bates, who's a paediatric dietitian, and she's the founder of Nourishing Bubs, which is such a genius product. It simplifies introducing food to your baby. It's a frozen baby food company. And basically, they lay those foundations for healthy eating from the very first bite. Olivia, you've got a background in dietetics and years on hands experience, because you have been, you have a background of caring for young children as a nanny, as a babysitter. You've had the spoon in your hand, you've gone through the struggles, and that's kind of your background. Thank you so much for sharing some knowledge with us today.
Thank you so much. So excited to be here. Obviously, I love this topic. Been talking about it for a while now, so I'm very excited to be here. Thank you.
I want to actually ask Olivia first. You obviously meet so many parents through this. Do you find that a lot of parents are overwhelmed by this? Is that a really common
100%.
thing?
I think the main, part of the issue around that is that, you do get slightly different advice, whether or not you're talking to your GP, your pediatrician, your mom, your mother-in-law, everyone really does have something to say about starting solids. And so, I've always done a lot of mothers groups, and I do, regularly run mothers group sessions. And I always found people were just really overwhelmed. And then you go online and then there's all different advice, and it's oh my God, I'm so sleep deprived. Can someone just give me one straight answer? I don't want it to be so conflicting. I don't want to have to make a decision. And so, I've always been very much about providing the most up-to-date advice. It does change. And it doesn't necessarily mean that people are, wrong. It's sometimes, they're using some slightly old school advice because that's what they used when they were going through that stage. And, and that's fine. It's just that, recommendations around introducing solids, allergen introduction, that actually has changed based on, up-to-date research. Science is so evolving. So it's not that they were wrong. It's not like they're trying to tell you the wrong thing. It's just that it's based on their own experience. So I have always been really, keen on just really cutting through the clutter. And even I have had to change, from what I say now, my advice now, it has subtly changed from what I, used to say at the beginning, when I was starting out. And that's just based on research and, where the science is at the moment.
I love that, changing with the times. Well, let's kick off. Let's ask the first question, which is, at what age should we start introducing food?
So this is probably the one where, there is a lot of debate around this. You go online. The advice that we like to use in Australia is we run off the Australian Society of Clinical Immunology and Allergy, so ASCII, you often see it written as, and their current advice, which is based on the Australian population, is to introduce solids around 6 months, not before 4 months when baby is showing signs of readiness. It also recommends to continue breastfeeding while doing so if you are breastfeeding. Now, that does sort of create this window between 4 to 6 months. I would say lately I have seen a bit more of a movement towards 6 months, and that's just, I think some people preferring to, wait a little bit longer. Also, one thing that we can never be sure of just from the outset is, whether or not baby's digestive system is ready. And that's one of the things that you literally only know from trial and error. If you try the solids, they're showing other signs, which I can go through in a second. But, you might try it and then their stomach becomes really distended and tight and they seem really uncomfortable. Those to me would be suggestions that their digestive system is just not quite ready. And I'd go, you know what, leave it for a week or two and then just try again. That's just one thing that we can't see from the outset. It is inside. But, I do know a lot of pediatricians are, do encourage people to start a little bit early. I do hear it a bit more with the pediatricians, I would say. With reflux babies, it's often quite common for them to recommend starting a little bit early, just so, obviously solids are a little bit heavier, so they will stay down easier. And obviously parents would prefer to maybe move to solids than having to medicate their child for that. I always say to people, though, look for the signs. So first of all, the first sign we're always going to talk about is that strong head and neck control. Now, I don't expect, for example, you to put Bub in the middle of the floor and without any support whatsoever, they can completely hold themselves upright. But if you were to put them in the high chair where there is a little bit of support, they can hold themselves upright. That's always going to be your number one thing. And the reason that that's important is if they still have a floppy neck, there is the potential for choking, which we obviously want to avoid. Aside from that, it's things like showing an interest in food, reaching for your food, looking at you really intensely while you're eating. If you were to bring a spoon near their mouth, they start to open their mouth as if to take it. Those are what we call like your more secondary signs. And some people will be like, oh, my baby's really showing that, but they're not necessarily holding themselves upright. So, making sure for that they've got that head and neck control. And for some babies, that will come at 4 months. And then it's up to you. I always say it also is up to you. It's up to your comfort level. Some people are so eager to get started. They're like, I can't wait for this. I'm so excited. And some people are really anxious, want to put it off a little bit. And I'm like, it's fine. You can wait till they're 6 months. Just make sure though, if they're nearing 7 months and you have tried and they are just will not take a bite in whatsoever, will not, they just seem to be really completely rejecting it altogether. Please do just check in with your pediatrician, make sure there's not something else going on like an undiagnosed tongue tie, which could interfere with their ability to progress onto solids. Because from 6 months, we know that their iron stores are starting to drop, and that's really the reason that we do have to add solids. It's because those iron stores are starting to drop and their iron requirements really jumping up. So look, it is around that 6 month mark, but yes, there is a bit of variation. People often use the World Health Organization, which says at 6 months. It doesn't use the word around or about, but the World Health Organization does cater to the whole world, including third world countries. And obviously, once you start to introduce solid food, you are introducing the potential for foodborne illness. And in third world countries, they obviously want to push that out as long as possible. Whereas, we're very lucky in Australia where it's safe. We have a really safe food supply. And so it is okay if you want to start a business. So in the end of the day, once they're showing those signs of readiness, it is also in your hands.
Yeah. I love that you've kind of clarified what those signs of readiness are. So that's a little indicator that you can look out for. Can you tell me through then, I guess, if you mentioned just before, once you start to introduce food, what are you looking out for in terms of if perhaps it's not sitting in their tummy?
Yeah, so in particular, it's more like those gastrointestinal symptoms. So, tummy seeming distended, very tight, them seeming uncomfortable, they might become quite gassy, seem like they're quite unsettled. Obviously, changes in their stools. Naturally, and you would know this, naturally there are going to be changes in their stools. I'm sorry, they do get a bit gross. They're not quite as tolerable, but, it is, if they were starting to become quite explosive or, they becoming particularly runny and bubbly and things like that would suggest, okay, maybe it's not sitting quite right. And that's where I would just look at probably pull back.
Okay, good to know. Now we're going to get into kind of, I guess, how we should start, perhaps what vegetables to start with, that sort of thing, and the timing of it. But can I first ask, how do we balance this with milk? Because, of course, let's just say at the 4 or 5 month mark, you've just been focused on milk. There's just milk feeds all the time, overnight feeds, day feeds. How does food fit in with milk? How does it work together?
Yeah, great question. So when you first start out, you still want to give your milk feed first, whether it's breastfeeding or formula feeding. Then you want to wait about half an hour. Obviously, their tummies are still really little. Allow a bit of time for that to digest and then move to the solid feed. So you would, yes, do your milk feed, wait half an hour, and then give your solid feed. So milk feed will still be very dominant. In the beginning, it is really just about giving them a little taste. They're going to fill up on the milk, so they will still be getting all of their energy and nutrients from the milk. It's just about tasting. But then this will gradually change as time goes on, and you will start to flip it around as you add more meals. and then solids will start to become more dominant, because obviously what's going to happen is you're going to move from a stage where they're getting all of their energy and nutrients from milk to a point where really at 12 months they should be getting or most or all of their nutrients from solid food. So it is a gradual process, a gradual increase in solid intake and a gradual decrease in that milk intake.
And we'll talk about that timeline in just a moment with also how do we approach even that first meal. But the first thing you actually have to decide is what approach you're taking in terms of solids. So of course there is this kind of, I don't want to call it an argument, but it's kind of these different approaches floating around of baby-led weaning versus the puree approach. I'd love for you to just decode what they actually mean. What are the approaches? And perhaps like, you know, can you do both? Do you have to stick to one? Just talk us through that decision.
Yeah, really great question. So we've obviously got your more traditional approach, which would be like your purees, where you start on a very smooth puree, you graduate that texture, and then ultimately you move to more like, I guess, whole solid pieces of food, finger foods. And then there's a form called baby-led weaning. And what this really is basically you skip that puree stage altogether and you go straight to finger foods. Now, obviously, you know, each, like at that sort of, you know, when you're first starting out, many of those children won't have any teeth. So it's like, okay, well, how do they do finger foods when they don't have teeth? Just because you are doing whole finger foods, it doesn't like, you still need to make sure that they're quite soft. So for example, you know, the first baby-led weaning foods you would give would be, you know, like vegetables where they're cooked so that they're so soft that you can squash them between your forefinger and your thumb. So, you know, really, really squashy, because for them, they need to be able to squash it between the palate and tongue of their mouth, because they might not have any teeth yet. Although, as you might know, like, you know, it is quite amazing what they can do with their gums. Like, wow, I didn't know those gums could be so strong. But yeah, so, and making sure that those foods are cooked so they're really, really soft. And then as time goes on, you know, you're allowed to start to cook them a little bit less. Obviously with things like, I mean, I feel like the most cliche image of baby-led weaning is like the baby with the lamb chop. And you're like, how? Like, how does that actually work? Like, obviously you can't, you know, make that softer, so to speak. Thing with something like a lamb chop or a chicken drumstick is that they will like gnaw on it and like suck out the goodness out of it, and they are still getting the benefits of it without like taking a whole bite of it. Now with baby-led weaning, it's all about the, you know, also the way that you cut it, prepare the food. So often we talk about, you know, making sure that food is like has some kind of handle, because babies won't have developed their pincer grip. So things like a lamb chop where it's got that handle, a chicken drumstick are great. Florets of broccoli, you know, where they can grab onto the tree, you know, steam sticks of carrot. So things that they can easily pick up with their planer grip is going to be the best option for them, because they won't be able to pick up those smaller things. And bigger is better. So, you know, I find the Solid Starts app is obviously a really great app for showing you the way to cut things for baby-led weaning, but bigger is better. Otherwise, babies do have a habit of being like, I'm going to put everything into my mouth. So you want to force them to have to like take a bite. So, you know, offer them, you know, the whole lamb chop, because they can't put the whole thing in their mouth. And, you know, so we always talk about sort of cutting things about like two fingers. So, you know, aim for that size. If you're cutting a piece of steak, cut it so it's like 2 fingers, because then they have to like, they're forced to take a bite rather than being like, I'm going to shove the whole thing in my mouth. Again, as time goes on, you'll start to cut it smaller. A lot of like, one thing I'll say is, you know, I have read the book. So the whole concept baby-led weaning, one reason why it's so popular is because it really leans into babies' ability to monitor their own appetite. And we know that babies innately are able to monitor their own appetite. For example, if you're breastfeeding your baby on the breast, you know that if you know, they cry when they're hungry and they stop feeding when they've had enough, and you don't know how much they've had unless you're expressing or you're giving them bottles. So you're like, okay, I assume they've had enough, like, and you're trusting that their instincts, they know that. So baby-led weaning is the same, because they are completely in control. You're letting them, you know, pick up the food, put it in their mouth, decide how much they're having. We do have a natural habit, especially if we have slaved all day to make a beautiful meal, of being like, come on. And I have done this as a babysitter. Come on, one more mouthful. Come on, you can do it. One more mouthful. And we try and like coax them into it. So I do encourage you to, if you are spoon feeding, like don't do that as much as you want to. Like learn to read their signs. Babies are really good at, you know, expressing themselves, and you will get good at reading their signs. So things like, you know, pulling the bib off, trying to climb out of the high chair, losing interest, like they're over it. Just leave it and move on. If they're like, they finish what's in their bowl and, they're looking around for more, or they cry when you take the bowl away, or they start reaching for some more food, like these are signs that they want more and you can offer them some more. You will really be guided by them. Like, let them guide you. Don't have in your head, oh, they need to have like half a cup of food, because there actually are no, like, we don't have guidelines for how much food up to 2 years old. We don't have guidelines for how much food they should be having. We just know that we need to follow them on the growth chart. We track them. We make sure they're sort of trending along the same growth line, whatever that line is, like, depending where they were born. We want them to sort of stay along that. So be guided by your own baby. Some of those groups, I know there's some groups on Facebook that are like baby-led weaning groups. I know some of them like ban people if talking about purees. I myself, and I know many other feeding specialists, are really big fans of like doing a combination approach, because some babies will lean really into purees and some will be like, hate it, will want the independence of feeding themselves. The only way to find out is really giving them the choice. And you could do it in the same meal, like you might give a spoonful of broccoli and a broccoli floret for them to play with, or you could do it between meals. So it's really up to you, but I'm a big fan of trying both. The only thing I would say is if you do start solids a bit earlier than 6 months, I wouldn't really bother with baby-led weaning until they're 6 months, because they're unlikely to just have that hand-eye coordination. But if you want to do both, by all means, I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I'm much big fan of doing both as well. I think as well, because at least with your first baby, baby-led weaning can be really daunting in terms of the choking hazard.
Yes,
as a parent. So I think it's not just, about everybody has to feel safe and secure and confident in what they're doing when it comes to introducing solids. So it's also a really nice way for the whole family to get into that journey by just offering that bit of puree. So totally on board on the crossover there. Just before we get to how you should start, can we talk about choking? Because this is a huge fear that parents have when it comes to
100%.
solids, and whether you're starting, as you said, at the start, at that 6 month mark, or whether you start to get into more chunky pieces of puree, what's your advice there?
So look, my first bit of advice would always be to do a baby first aid course. I think it equips you with the, the tools and the knowledge. Knowledge is power, to know what to do in that case of emergency. It's scary. And I have dealt with so many kids over the years, and still I've had a shoot where like a baby was like gagging and I was like, oh my God, this is what happens if a baby like chokes on my photo shoot. Like, it's still terrifying. I think also understanding the difference between a gag and a choke, because I think gagging, because like that sounds terrifying, but it actually is, gagging is a natural, a natural response. It is something that they need to learn to do. They need to learn how to clear. As adults, we obviously have had situations where like a bit of popcorn gets stuck on your like, what do I do? It is natural. Baby's gag reflex is much closer to the surface than an adult. So they will gag well before they will choke. But that aside, it's still scary. If your baby is obviously gagging through the whole meal, like that's going to potentially like develop like a negative association. So if they were doing that, I do say, like wait, like if they are gagging, you need to wait and give them a second to see if they can clear it. Obviously, if it goes on, I would intervene, but intervening with a gag can sometimes like move it further into a choking position. A choke is quite silent, so because the whole airway is obstructed, then their face will start to go blue, which is obviously very terrifying. Whereas a gag tends to be that sound, red face, and can get to the point where they, become quite hysterical. But it is important to try and stay calm, try and watch them. This is why it's so important to always be observing them while they're eating. But then obviously they do go into a choke, it is those back blows. But to be honest, I would always just recommend do the baby. I mean, I think everyone can benefit from just doing a baby first aid course, knowing what to do, knowing the times when it is appropriate to intervene for it, because it is scary. But I think too often maybe parents intervene too early, when they shouldn't. So, I would say is try and stay calm, but also, also take precautions about, the way that you prepare food. Like, think about it. Is that a choking hazard for them? You can think about like the airway as like a thick smoothie straw. If that food could block that, then that is a choking hazard. So always think about the way that you are cutting food, making sure you halve or quartered grapes and cherry tomatoes and, hot dogs and, avoiding things like marshmallows, like, and we put up tips and there's, lots of tips about the way to prepare food. But just always think about the way that you prepare food if you think that is a potential choking hazard. In saying that, obviously, things can go down the wrong way and anything can be a choking hazard. But yes, I do find for that reason, a lot of people will not do baby-led weaning first time round, tend to do it more second time round. I would say there's a rapid spike in baby-led weaning in second baby because they know what to expect and they're more able to, I guess, maybe deal with the choking.
Yeah. Well, I love that you've recommended the first aid course. I think in general, that'll give you a little bit of a boost of confidence in all elements of first aid. And it's so funny, like that you mentioned marshmallows. And so my eldest Noah is 4 now. And just the other day, he said to me, he goes, "Mum, when I'm 5, I get to have popcorn, marshmallows, and grapes that aren't cut." Because I've always lived by that. I've always lived by that rule that at age 5, I can introduce it, which is really hard as well as they get a little bit older and, popcorn's around, other, fair enough, other families offer it. But he just literally brought up the marshmallows.
It's so funny. I mean, the marshmallows, well, the baby Chino with the marshmallows, like, it's so devastating.
He's always so devastated, but I guess he's kind of just always looked towards the age of 5 as that. I'm just going to have to buy him a whole bag of marshmallows for his birthday.
Well, if that's all you have to get, that you're winning.
Exactly. Another tip that I heard when I was starting off, Olivia, maybe you can tell me if this was correct, but is also making sure that you're feeding them in the right environment. So, for example, making sure that, they're in the high chair, they're actually sitting down for a meal, they're strapped in. Because I think one time I read, for example, if you put them in a bouncer and they're more in that laying position, it's not just harder to grab them and to perform CPR, but it's also the fact that they're laying down. So making sure that you have them in the right environment. Is that right?
Yeah, so that is a really good comment. So you basically need to make sure that they are sitting upright and they're right angles. So, the amount of times I see people that, have their baby in like a recliner. I can understand why they're like, oh, first try a food. I'm just going to give them a spoonful in the high chair. But it's just the way that it angles then their, their oral muscles, it's not appropriate. It increases their risk of choking, which we obviously don't want. So we do need to make sure that they are sitting at right angles, so their back is straight up and their legs are out. And then ideally, as their legs get a bit longer, they're going to start to drop down as well. So we talk about those right angles, and then having the ideally having a footrest on the high chair as well, just to give them some stability. Also, just a child. I know people that also like, oh no, I don't want to restrain them or whatever, so I'm going to give them food, but then they're running around. And I mean, I always grew up with that whole you can't run with a lollipop and things like that, because what if you fall? And then so just things like that. Obviously, if they're running around, the increased risk of choking, they're not concentrating on it. So definitely, I'm a big advocate of, them understanding the feeding routine, having a high chair, also just to contain the mess, having a high chair, putting a bib on, maybe have a smock, and then have something like, a mat, like splash mat or a high chair catchy or something, one of those things to just try and keep the mess contained will also help your sanity as well. But yes, definitely keeping them in using a high chair where they are properly sitting up straight rather than any kind of, recline situation is definitely really.
Yeah, right. Okay, well, let's tackle the big question of how do we start. So, of course, your packs really help here because you kind of simplified it for parents, what fruits and veg you can kick off with. So let's talk through that, but then also just what meal do you start with? How do you build it? What timeline are you going for?
Yeah, so definitely look, I'm always a really, firstly, I'm always a big advocate of a vegetable forward approach. There is increasing evidence coming out supporting the benefits of starting with vegetables over fruit, just because we know that babies innately have a preference for sweet food. So if you go straight to fruit, which often people do just because like they'll be like, oh, I just want to give them a bit of banana and see how they go. But we know that, naturally they will tend to love, sweet foods. Whereas vegetables can obviously be a little bit harder to get in. Obviously, some of them have quite a bitter taste, like your broccoli, etc. And obviously, just in terms of like requirements for nutrition, the vegetable requirements are higher than the fruit ones. Whereas we find only 6% of Australians are meeting the vegetable requirements, whereas it's quite much easier to meet the fruit. So I am a huge advocate of a vegetable forward approach, which is why we have vegetables in our starter pack. I there's no real hard fast rule on which one you start with. I tend to say I even recommend starting with one that's not even in our pack, but avocado I find is a great first food. It's pretty flavor neutral, like it's not too savory or sweet. Great texture, nice and creamy, usually quite well tolerated. And it's also really, high in good fats, which is obviously beneficial as well. So often I'll say, start with some avocado, see how they go. And then something like zucchini. Zucchini is a great one. It's a really naturally runny consistency, pretty flavor neutral when it's cooked. So it's a great one. Then I usually say move to more like your savory, like your broccoli, and then move to like your sweeter, like your sweet potato. Another common first one is pumpkin, though. Like people love pumpkin, and that's fine. Like, it's still a vegetable. I'm still pretty happy with that. I usually would recommend doing it. I always recommend a new food in the first half of the day. So naturally, it just makes it easier to do your first meal being breakfast. However, remember, they have no concept of like breakfast should be sweet or anything like that, or what it should be like. So don't feel like, oh, well, do I need to be giving cereal or something like that? It's like that is really entirely up to you. I'd just be giving initially I would say start with veggies. I would do 1 to 2 weeks of straight vegetables just to get them, into the habit of it. Then I would start to incorporate proteins with that. Obviously, from 6 months, those iron requirements are really important. So if you are starting close to the 6-month mark, getting that iron in quite quickly is going to be really important for you. Obviously, things like your red meat is going to be your best sources, but then things like your poultry, liver, if you want to do liver, is great. And then move into like, you can also do things like your dark leaf, your legumes, which are all also really good sources of iron. You just want to pair those with veggies because they contain vitamin C, which will help boost that absorption of iron. So yeah, look, really prioritizing getting veggies and getting iron in there is going to be really important. So yeah, morning is always usually my first start. I usually recommend just doing 1 month of one meal. So, and literally that might be a spoon and that's fine. Like when you first start out, they might only take a teaspoon. It will increase over time. It can take 6 weeks for them to get to a point where they'd have half a cup, but that would just be, it is definitely a gradual process. After 1 month, I would add a second meal. Doesn't really matter which one it is. Some people find it easy to do like breakfast and dinner, so to speak, and then they add lunch last. Up to you though. And I just still make sure you kept your new foods in the first half of the day. The reason being is it also just allows you to monitor for any reactions, also just making sure it's at the beginning of an awake or as early as possible at the beginning of an awake window, so that if there is an adverse reaction, and in worst case scenario, an allergy, which I know we're going to cover, but allergies we know take 5 minutes to 2 hours to occur. So obviously, ideally, we want them to be awake for that and we want to, observe them. So first half of the day for new foods, 1 month of one meal, add your second meal at 2 months, and then after 2 months, you'd add your third meal. So look, if you've started at 6 months, by 8 months, you've moved to 3 meals. And then that's also the time when you would start to swap it over and you would start to give your solid feed first and then your milk. So the order changes because the solids start to become more dominant as well. So yeah, that's really the timeline of it. Also around that 8-month mark, 9 month, if you have done purees, that's also often the stage where you start to move to finger foods. And whether or not you've done baby-led weaning or you've done purees, ultimately they really converge at that point as well.
Okay, amazing. So that's a really good little guide on kind of how the months start to change and everything transitions. It's funny because it is a bit of a, between that 4-6 month mark up to about a year, it is like rapidly changing. There's a lot going on. And then all of a sudden they're eating. And like, then you're kind of maybe dealing with, are they a picky eater or this and that? But at least, it is a big commitment. It is a big journey. So just be prepared that there are a lot of changes, and that not just for you, but also baby is a big undertaking for the family, especially that first time around. Olivia, can you provide we spoke a little bit about it when we talked about high chair, but can you give us any advice on purchases? Because this is also something that can get a little bit expensive for parents. You're looking at a high chair, you're buying bowls and this and that and food processors and warmers, and there's just all these products on the market when it comes to baby food. Talk us through some of your big tips when it comes to purchases.
Amazing. So look, with the high chair, I think there are definitely like some really fancy ones, or there's like, your Kmart one, which I think is like $30. Like, honestly, like there is actually nothing, like, sorry to all the expensive brands out there, but there is nothing wrong with the Kmart one. The main issue I have with it is it doesn't have a footrest. And so then there are brands, though, I think Nibble and Rest I know is one of them, where you can buy a footrest and then you can adjust it. And that's what you're going to want to do. So as long as you can add a footrest to it, which are definitely available now, that is what I would do, because we know that it is really important to have the stability of a footrest. This once got described to me and I thought it was the best example. But imagine, when you sit on a bar stool, a high bar stool, it has that little spot for you to put your feet. Imagine if it wasn't there and you have to like focus on controlling your core so you don't fall off the chair, but you're also trying to eat for the first time. Like, they need to just be able to focus. So, making sure they have the footrest there, but you don't need to buy an expensive high chair. Don't get like fooled into thinking you need like a really, really fancy one. Obviously there are some, stock A, which is, people love because you can then transition it to the table. I guess it really depends on your priorities and what's really important to you. I know there is a little bit of, I guess, push back against ones like the Bumbo. The Bumbo also is, and it's the one where you like sit it on top of the bench or something. It's also quite short-lived though. Like, if you get the Bumbo, ultimately you need to still get a high chair anyway, because ultimately their feet will then need to come off because they get longer. It's only really suitable for a short period of time. And they also talk about, I've heard OTs talk about the fact that like their hip, the placement of their hip is not really ideal. So, even if you just get a Kmart one thing I would say is obviously they're a bit like they're all one size fits all. So sometimes it can be good to either you can buy, I know, fillers, like where it sort of feels and provides a bit of padding, like I guess like in a car seat, where it just like supports them a little bit more. Or you can literally just get a towel, roll it into a snake and just wrap it around the trunk of their body just to help provide a bit of support, especially if your bub is a little bit on the smaller side. But, I don't think it's one of those things you want to go and spend thousands of dollars on unless you put in for your aesthetic or whatever it is. In terms of spoons, it's just really important that you have like a silicone spoon over a metal spoon. Metal obviously picks up the temperature of the food and also can feel quite different in their mouth, whereas silicone, doesn't. It also often doubles as a tea, that once they get their hands on it, they'll often back of their mouth. You just want to have a very shallow bowl, small shallow bowl, and a small size which is suitable for their little mouths. Very easy to find at the supermarket or MS, baby's first spoon. Very easy to find. In terms of, look, I would personally not recommend going and buying like a steamer or a blender or even a warmer. Honestly, if I'm one of those people, I'm like, I have the utensils, but I like to minimize the space it's all taking up. It's such a short period of time, even if you want to puree yourself. I mean, like most people have got something like a NutriBullet or a stick blender. Like, get something that has multiple purposes. Don't go and buy like a baby food prepper, because honestly, it's such a short period of their life. Like, it'd be better just to buy a NutriBullet or something that you can use for other purposes. I mean, I personally love like a stick blender. I find it so useful for others. But also often things you can also mash quite well with like a fork or like a masher. So it is one of those things that I wouldn't go and spend heaps of money on that. It's probably a bit of waste. If you are preparing food for yourself, I would definitely recommend using something like just even an ice cube tray. Obviously, like that's what our product is based off, but the reason being is that they eat such small portions. that you don't want to go and make huge batches and, be defrosting huge amounts when they're only going to have a very little amount. So, putting nice cube trays is going to be the best option. And then you can always defrost multiple blocks, but you don't want to just to try and avoid that food waste. Otherwise, there is quite a lot of food waste. I would definitely use like a bib, a smock. Smocks are great. I think just to try and contain the mess. High chair catchy obviously killing it. Great product. I think it's a fantastic product. You can also, though, get like splash mats that sit underneath the high chair just to keep the mess contained somewhat. It is messy. It is like inevitably you just have to let that go. If you're a neat freak, please let it go. It's also, you don't want to be always wiping their mouth, and it is important that they learn to have messy play and that they do get messy and that you are not constantly up. So like let them indulge in that. But yeah, I understand it's hard because it's grubby. But yeah, they're probably, get a high chair, but it doesn't need to be a super fancy one. Get yourself a couple of bibs, get yourself a couple of smocks, and then some kind of, something that can go underneath. They're probably the essentials. In terms of the bowls, like there's lots of people doing them, like some kind of, silicone bowls I generally find are great because they can go in, whether it's in the microwave or you can put it over hot water. If you want to defrost it that way, some people, either don't have a microwave or don't want to use the microwave, completely fine. But yeah, silicone is great. I probably prefer silicone, but there are also like bamboo options and things like that. You just obviously have to check whether they can be heated up in the microwave. But I think sometimes people overcomplicate it and they're like, I need to buy all of these things and I need this and I need that. And the reality is like, you don't. You could heat it up over hot water. You can heat it up over the stove. It doesn't, you definitely don't need a warmer just for that.
Yeah. Well, we had a baby food maker, I want to call it. I don't know. It's just like a little mini blender and boiler that was on our baby registry, and that was the worst decision. I literally used it once, and then I sold it on Facebook Marketplace. Sorry to the person who bought it for us. Because yeah, it's so funny. Like you think that you need all these gadgets to help, and I don't know what it is, like simplify or save time, but then you kind of forget that it's kind of, my husband compared it to, people buy a rice cooker, but you can just cook rice in a pot. So like you kind of just want to make your life easier, but you have all of the things at home that you can start with. So just give it a go. You always have the option if you're like, do you know what? I hate getting all these pots and pans dirty or whatever. And then get yourself a little maker if you think it's going to make life easier. But yeah, just, I think as with your advice, start small, get the essentials, and then you can build on that. Maybe you'll prefer a spoon, prefer a bowl, and then you can kind of get more of those. I know the baby stage can be so expensive, not just with eating, but just with food and nursery and all this setup. So even all throughout these episodes on the podcast, I love to ask, people, where can we save a bit of money? Where can we simplify things? Because these little creatures cost a lot of money.
No, I would definitely let the baby. I'm ahead. I know that. No sponsorship deals there.
Yeah, well, Olivia, a huge part of introducing solids as well is allergens. So introducing allergens is another really daunting part of this journey. There's, a lot of new research into this, which is a great time to be a parent and to have the assistance of what you should be introducing and when, and how to safely do so. I think it's such a bigger topic than just one question. So I would love if you could join me for another episode. We are going to play this one out next week. We're going to drop that as a bit of an extension on this and have a lengthier chat about allergies with Olivia, because she's got all of the answers on this topic for you, and just to help you get a grip on this and get an understanding on it before you tackle it. The reason I want to talk to you, Olivia, about this as well is because you guys have introduced this amazing allergen intro pack. It contains 14 of the most common food allergens, including the 9 tree nuts that a lot of people miss. And that you have very generously provided that as a giveaway for this, I want to say today's episode, but it's a bit of a duo episode. So today's and next week's episode, one person will win that intro pack. I'm going to pop the details on how to enter that giveaway in our show notes. Olivia, stay with us. We are going to get all of the answers from you. And next week, you guys will get all of that information.